I'm glad you came.
You are listening to Paramania Radio.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dave, host of Rockin' with Doc. Come join me to explore the world of music and let it drive your soul. You'll hear songs like Here I Am, rock you like a hurricane, and this. How about some classics like this? No matter what you'd like, you'll hear it here. Now on Saturdays and Sundays at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Join me every Sunday for the All Song Request Hour, where you, the listener, get to pick your favorite tunes. And Saturday for my weekly themed playlist. You know, Brock, I'm a little bummed since Tech Time ended.
Yeah, me too. But you know what we could do to fix this?
What?
A new show.
A new show? About what?
About all things paranormal. Not just technology, but everything.
Brilliant. What would we call it?
Paratime with Brock and Doc.
Cool. And it could air on Sundays at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific?
Only on the Paramania Radio Network.
Awesome.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual hosts and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Paramania, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
You are listening to Paramania Radio.
Hi, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you happen to be. You're listening to Leo Bonomo on Paramania Radio. If you do want to call in for some free readings, the number is 919-2950150, and you can, of course, Skype us on Paramania Radio. And we have a guest, Melissa Bryan. She goes under a stage name of Jennifer Cromwell Whitefeather. She's granddaughter of the elder Whitefeather of the VA Iroquois people, and she's the 14th grandniece of Dragon Canoe of the Western Cherokee people. We have hit a slight hitch, so we're actually waiting for her to make contact with the station. So if you're listening, please don't get in contact, Melissa, because we are waiting for you. And again, Melissa, initially you can contact us on Paramania Radio on Skype. So if you could do that, that's wonderful. Okay, so tonight we have Melissa. She does lots of different things. She's a shaman, reads tarot. She's a healer. She does lots of live readings. And she's also got a book which is coming out, and she's also just kind of breaking into TV, so there seems to be a lot of interest in her at the moment. So she's beginning to be a very busy lady, and we're just going to be waiting on her. So while I'm kind of stalling a bit, just waiting for her to get in touch, I hope you liked last week's show. There were some recordings from Leslie Flint, and they were two ex-US presidents, Thomas Jefferson and Herbert Hoover, and I hope you found that interesting. That you can find, of course, on the archive, and it is a good thing to search through, because you'll see some of the guests, the recent guests that have been there. Just out of interest, if you do go to the archives, they are kept for a time, but they are taken off. And it's basically, a technical thing just to save some space on the server, and that is because Paramania Radio has shows going all the time, as I'm sure you know, and all of the shows are backed up. So we do need to clear a little bit at the end, but there's a long list of past radio programs that you can find on there. So one of the things that both Herbert Hoover and Thomas Jefferson agree on from The Other Side of Life is that death is a gateway that frees the soul, and there is absolutely nothing to fear about passing. That is a subject that we have covered many times on the show, and it's one of the things that has been introduced by religion, which is no pun intended, the literal fear of God itself. And passing isn't painful. Yes, the body will react, but when that time comes for us to physically pass, we're not there. So they both talked about that. They also talked about religions and creeds becoming a thing of the past. And one thing that we have noticed is that this has started to happen in the world in a very small way. Excuse me. We have begun to see that the spread of spiritualism as a religion has grown significantly, that there is a movement away from what we may call more established religions. So there is that. Obviously, lots of religions do also agree on life after death. If you're looking at Buddhism, etc., then we can see that they do believe in these things, and so there's a much more spiritual aspect, as we would understand it, as a spiritualist from that point of view. So we're just going to see whether or not we can actually get Melissa to make contact with us, and we're just waiting on that. Okay, we're going to continue waiting with that. So if you want readings from myself in particular, you can find me on www.leo, that's leo-bonomo, bonomo.com. My site is now up and running again properly. There were some technical issues, but that's all been sorted, so you can have face-to-face readings if you live in the UK, in the Bedford area, then fantastic. Otherwise, I do readings on Skype and the phone, of course. So if you're interested in those, I also do email readings, so you can contact me on there. Okay, we're just, if you've just joined us, we're just waiting for Melissa Bryan to make some contact for her, and we're searching to see whether or not that's going to happen. Right, let me just see. So Melissa, if you're out there, do make contact with us. I have left you some messages on Facebook, and if anyone knows Melissa or can get through to her, if you're a personal friend or family, whatever it may be, do give her a call so that she can get back in contact with us, and we can carry on with tonight's planned show. If not, we will soldier on, and we will provide some entertainment for you. Now, if you have any questions at all of a spiritual nature, and whether this is developing, whether it's aspects of mediumship as you see it from others, whether it's a reading yourself that you want, or whether it's something connected to it. So whether you want to talk about ghosts, demons, odd experiences you may have had, explanations of anything, the information is channeled, and I do channel an awful lot, as people who know me would understand. And I'm just going to put out a message. If you're on Facebook or anyone knows of... oops, that's gone to the wrong page. Let me just see if we can get there. Okay. You can probably hear me typing here, which is bad form, but I'm just going to put this out live as you can in touch with us. Okay. Yes, I think I've spelt Paramania Radio wrong. I do apologise for this. Where are we? Right, hopefully that doesn't look right. We're just going to do this again. Okay, so I'm stalling a little bit, as you can hear, but we're certainly doing our best to make contact with Melissa. So hopefully that's going out fantastic. Okay, now again, if you do have any questions, get in contact with us on any aspects of mediumship that you would like to. Sorry, this just doesn't. I've got something else that doesn't seem to be working here. Okay, so I'm actually going to. Come out of that, because I do find this is a distraction. If you've heard me before on radio, you do know that once I start to do what you might call normal things like this, typing or trying to solve a problem, which happen frequently on Blog Talk Radio, which is one reason I really left them, I do get grounded. So for me personally, it's not a great thing to be doing, but hopefully we can get Melissa in touch with us. She is an author, and she'll want to be talking about her book, and she's also beginning to break through, as I say, on TV. So there seems to be quite a lot of interest in her. So hopefully all that will come together. Okay, so if you want to call us again. It's 919-2950-150. You can get us on Paramania Radio. That's the Skype address, of course, Paramania Radio. And do write in. If you have any suggestions for topics tonight, to talk about, then we can certainly talk about that, and we can discuss anything that you want of a paranormal. I am so sorry, of a paranormal nature. Okay. It seems that it may be a little bit difficult to get in contact with her. Okay, now, one of the terms that's often bandied about is of being a spiritualist, and people do ask me from time to time whether I'm a spiritualist, and I do surprise people by saying no, I don't consider myself a spiritualist. I do consider myself spiritual, but I don't like the banner of being a spiritualist as such. I find that there are too many constructs, and again, because spiritualism is a religion, I do also find that those constructs are sometimes not always helpful to how we view ourselves. Spirit is meant to be freedom. It's not meant to be confined in any particular way, and whilst the 7 steps of spiritualism were given to us through Emma Harding, or given to Emma Harding Britain. They were given as a guidance, and even today, those have been changed, and again, they have been changed to become a little more fluid and a little more up to date. Now, for myself, as many people would know, Spirit Truth doesn't change. I don't feel that we can change those basics to suit ourselves and to suit the way that we live now, much as Christianity and some other religions have been changed to fit in with the modern way of thinking. Okay, so we're still waiting for Melissa. Not quite given up on her yet, but hopefully she will come through. If not, do give us a call, 919-295-0150. If you have any questions or you want a quick reading, then please get in touch with us that way. You can get us on Paramania Radio. That's the Skype address, of course. And the chat room is open, so if you want to discuss that. Okay. Now, right. Let me see if we can just carry on as we are. As you can probably see, I tend not to get flustered, but I'm a little bit tonight. So that I can hopefully find out when Melissa's going to be in touch. I do have a feeling that this is not going to happen. Okay, so let me just see if we can find a subject. We're going to go into a very short break now, have some music play, and what I'm going to try and do is find a book from my library to talk about a particular subject. So I'm going to find a subject to talk about, and we're going to go into a break shortly. I'm just going to be notified when that is. Okay, so we're just going to go into a break, and I'm going to find something to talk about, and we'll be straight back.
A second. What do you mean the show is moving? Now on Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, join host Tim Malley as he brings you the most recognizable names in the paranormal field on Fox Cities Paranormal Radio.
Look in my eyes, what do you see? The cult of personality.
This is a test of the Emergency Alert System capabilities. This test has been initiated by National Alert and Warning Authorities in coordination with Emergency Alert System participants, including broadcast, cable, satellite, and wireline participants in your area. If this had been an actual emergency after the attention signal you just heard, you would have been informed that you missed Fireside Chat with Mama D on Paramania Radio. Fortunately, this was just a test, so join Mama D Angel every Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific on Paramania Radio. We now return you to your regular programming.
You are listening to Paramania Radio.
Welcome to the all-new Paramania Radio.
Don't go by the book. Think like a pirate.
Hi, welcome back. We took a slightly longer and slightly unusual break there from slightly earlier. I do apologise. I'm getting a little flustered. I'm just going to turn some of this stuff off here because I've got screens up. We were waiting for Melissa Bryan. Not entirely sure what's happened, but she hasn't made contact, so we're going to leave that to one side. So was a little bit flustered myself, which is very unusual. But tonight we're going to be talking about a really great book. It's a favourite book of mine. I read this many years ago when it was in hard copy and it had a light blue cover, and I lent it to someone, didn't get it back, bought another original, etc., and ended up with a copy now which I've got is very different cover, and it's in paperback. Now the book that I'm talking about is called Testimony of Light. And if you haven't heard of it, I think it is an absolute classic book. It is something which certainly inspired me in so many different ways. And just the origin of how the book came about is something of an inspiration. It talks about spirit world and what it's like and how we can progress. So it gives those kinds of details. So whilst that's not unusual from many books that were written many years ago, and I'm trying to find out when this actually was written. It came out originally in 1969, so quite some time ago, and it was reprinted by the Church's Fellowship for Psychical and Spiritual Studies. Now, one of the things that does make this book very different is not just the detail of life in spirit and how we come to be there and how we progress. It was quite a brave book to write, and having written it, to physically publish. And the reason for that is that Helen Greaves, the author of the book, was a nun. and the friend that passed over was the late Frances Banks, MA, and she was formerly a sister of the Francis Mary. She was Sister Francis Mary of the Community of the Resurrection, Grahamstown, South Africa. So you have the South African kind of connection there, which in spiritual terms, as you probably know, there were some complications going back many years ago. You've also got the Christian Catholic kind of connection there, and the extraordinary thing was that Francis and Helen began spiritual and psychic experiments when they were nuns. Now, as you probably know, certainly at that time, it's loosened a little. But the Catholic Church, etc., was given instructions on how dangerous and ill-advised it was to make contact with what they called saints, was frowned upon. So for them to be conducting experiments at that time between themselves was quite something. Now, basically what happened was Francis Banks passed away. She then got in contact with her friend Helen Greaves and started to give her instructions on how to write this book. So the fact that two nuns were practicing these experiments in a nunnery quite actively, the fact that Francis came back to give information to Helen, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised at. But the fact that Helen, from that position, was quite brave enough to want to publish this wonderful book and to give it life. And again, it is a very inspiring book. Very, very underrated. I've talked to quite a few people. Many of them have never heard of the Testimony of Light. It still sells lots and lots of copies. In one sense, it isn't mainstream, which is, I think, a great shame, because there is so much valuable information in this book. Helen Greaves also went on to author The Dissolving Vow and The Wheel of Eternity. I have a copy of The Wheel of Eternity as well, and also Living Waters. Now, I think at this time when this was reprinted, this Living Waters hadn't actually come into existence. Now, the book itself is about Frances Banks as she passed over and made contact with Helen, gave her instructions as to what to do. So she would sit at a regular time and regular intervals and take instructions from Francis. And there was an interview with the late Sir Malcolm Sargent on the BBC in April 19th in 1968. And again, it's very hard to find some of these editions of BBC programs because they do come forward. It's almost as though some of them slip through the fingers because they are not really advocates of this, and they always have to get skeptics and a band of skeptics to give in speech marks a balanced view, which basically turns out to be rubbishing this thing that we do. And you may ask, what is it that we do? Well, what we do is we try and bring light and love and succor to people so that we can explain to them that passing is not painful and there is an existence afterwards. So there is actually a lot to look forward to. And that being the main message of Spirit, that there is an existence after this and that there is no hell as such. There are conditions we create for ourselves. And that basically is the tenet that Spirit try and bring forward. And what Sir Malcolm Sargent said was, I feel death, which I've never been afraid of. of which I look forward to. And the interviewer said, "You look forward to death?" And Sir Malcolm Sargent replied, "Oh, very much. Obviously. I mean, this life has been wonderful, and because I've loved this life so much, I know that I shall love death more. Don't you remember," he said, "when I came to this world, I do not remember a moment, but I was not a stranger. And so it shall be when one passes from life to death, from life to life." So, again, a wonderful statement there from Malcolm Sargent. It does epitomise, really, I think, what spiritualism is about, that there is no need for this fear. I have said this before, but I was asked during a reading quite some time ago from a lady that was quite afraid of it. And what happened was my guide, I suddenly went into trance, although I do remember this, because I do remember parts that are instructional for myself and students. And my guide came through and said something very similar to this. Was a long time ago. "My child, why are you afeard of death? You were never afeard of being born, and you are simply passing back through a door through which you have entered." So we enter this door into life, and we have purpose here. We have things to do and things to experience, and we simply pass back through that door when we pass away. And just as 99% of us don't remember the physicality of being born, although you can find instructions, recounts, people recount the experience, very few. But of course, you have many more accounts of near-death experiences and astral projection and the like. This book does give some great instructions on it. As I say, it's one of my favourite books, and I'll just read a little bit of this, and this is from Helen Greaves. "The scripts in this book have, I believe, been communicated to me by telepathy and inspiration from the surviving mind of Francis Banks, MA, who left this world on November the 2nd, 1965. No doubt this will be challenged as a bold statement. I make it in perfect faith and with integrity. If the reader has studied my book, The Dissolving Vow, published in 1967 by the Church's Fellowship for Psychical and Spiritual Studies, he will realise that this work of telepathy and communications between the worlds was not a work of my choosing. The extrasensory perceptions of clairaudience and telepathy which I've developed into a receiving set for these communications were never sought by me. I do not use these perceptions professionally or for personal gain of any sort. Francis Banks was an intimate friend of mine. For the last 8 years of her life, we worked together psychically and spiritually. We also explored the deep levels of meditation." And I think in the essence of that is the essence of how we should develop, and that we should take time to develop. Now, of course, it's something that has been discussed many times during these programs, that while spirit has to a degree speeded up the development process, it does take time. And in the world in which we live, where everything is wanted now, or in fact yesterday, we do seem to want the quick way to it. So even in that very short an explicit sentence there, it does say that we need to take time. And the other fact is that most of us who develop these abilities and fine-tune these abilities haven't really asked to have them. So there is an instinct there, or a memory, or, as in my case, the full knowledge from a very young age that there was something else. Now, whilst I say we don't choose these things, obviously, certainly in my case, I came here to do this work. So there was planning from spirit to arrive here and take this task on. But others don't ask, they just become aware, and they develop that interest, and they go on to be developing mediums themselves. One of the wonderful things, which is quite descriptive in the book, is of the places in spirit where Frances found herself, and she describes houses, she describes the life, she describes daily living, and how they get around, which, as you probably know, is by thought. Anything in spirit can be gained by thought. Now, that's a slightly misleading statement, because we do have to earn what we require. So there is a kind of recognition. There is certainly a hierarchy, as we would understand from, the Creator itself and the angels, etc., etc. So there is a hierarchy there. So whilst thought can create everything, we ourselves don't have the freedom to create buildings, because that would result in a certain amount of anarchy, and of course everything is in harmony. Certainly on the middle to higher layers of existence. So there are people that have the gift, the authority to, for example, plan buildings and make monuments. And whilst those things are created by thoughts, the creation is such that it can't be dissolved by just anybody that would be around, that would want to change it for any reason. So monuments, universities, homes, etc. are created. And she does go into this in a small way, but she describes the beautiful countryside and the existences that they have there. Frances also discusses in a beautiful way a gentleman that pops over and some of the difficulties that he has, and she goes through how she begins to educate him and get him to become accustomed to life where she is. So there's still that very spiritual, loving nature that she had as a nun, and expressed in helping the gentleman that came over. So there are several characters within the book, but it's a wonderful, wonderful explanation. Why this book itself, although it's been a constant seller, which is wonderful, but why this book itself has never become a bestseller, to be honest, I don't know. I think certainly when it came out, it was very different, still very popular. But because it wasn't mainstream in any sense, I think that publishers weren't certainly willing to take a chance. But the fact that it got published and has been a constant bestseller since 1969 is a testament itself to the quality of the writing and the quality of the experiences that are recounted in it. So it is, I'd say, a very popular book, one of my absolute favourites. So if you've not heard of it, I'll give you the title again. It's called A Testimony of Light, and it's written by Helen Greaves, and you can find it. It's printed by Daniel. Now that does sound like a gentleman's name, but it's the copy I have here is Neville Spearman Publishers, and the company is called C.W. Daniels Limited. As far as I know, they are still going, and it is a wonderful print of a wonderful experience. As I say, quite unusual in many ways. Is the fact that it came through essentially a Catholic background and written by nuns. And as I read through this, there are some very interesting passages here. There's one here that's detailed the Daily Telegraph, and it's the 31st of October 1968. Now the reason that I say this is because if you are current on the news and you watch the news very avidly, you'll realise that they now have a way which they find incredible of curing prostate cancer, and this basically involves getting some sort of bacteria from the bottom of the sea, and what they do is they give it to you as a pill, etc., and they have found a way of inserting it's almost like a probe, but they light the probe up, so when the light is emitted around the prostate, it activates that bacteria which kills the cancer. So this is quite recent. I was watching this on the news no more than a couple of days ago. So if you think about that, and in conjunction with this, on the 31st of October 1968, cancer cells detected by laser light, a promising new way of detecting cancer cells using laser light to illuminate them under the microscope is being investigated at the International Research and Development Company's laboratories in Newcastle upon Tyne. There is evidence that the malignant cells take on a brilliant red glow while normal cells do not. This was first observed when scientists started looking at malignant cells from the gut. So they were looking then at light, not only being able to identify cells, but and this again is in 1968, but we're still looking at ways now of treating cancer, but in a slightly different way, but also by using light. Now, if you know anything about mediumship and spirit, etc., you know that it is all about light. Light has a particular vibration. Different kinds of light have different vibrations, and again, we're getting back to the realms of light being a substance of itself, if I can very badly put it that way. So light affects everything. We always talk about, even in fact, evil as the battle between darkness and light. But there is certainly a correlation there. We also have here, and this is on the 13th of October 1966, neutron used as a cancer treatment. Scientists in Britain have started work on a new radiation device using neutrons, which may be more effective than X-rays in the treatment of many forms of cancer. Mr. James Woods, in charge of the project at the Ministry of Defence Services Electronics Research Laboratory, Baldock, Hertfordshire. That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? We cannot say definitely yet whether it will be a cure, but it looks like a 50-50 bet. So even in this book, which was written or certainly published in 1969, it has information there of a medical nature, and it's one of the joys of this book that it touches on so many things which are helpful and still being used by man today. So it's an unusual book in that sense as well. Okay, so let me just have a quick look through here. So this is, I'm going to read a short excerpt here from, this is the return of Frances Banks. Frances Banks died as she had lived, fully conscious of what she was doing and where she was hoping to go. She refused drugs until the very end, bearing her pain with fortitude. At the last, she spoke of seeing incarnate and discarnate entities in her room. She arranged her material affairs and said farewell to those of her friends who were near enough to visit her. She astonished the good Scottish doctor who attended her at the last by saying cheerfully a day or so before she lapsed into a coma, "Goodbye, doctor, see you in the next world." Her brave words to me, "I know, I have cancer, I will not get over this," indicated that she had accepted and was ready for the next phase. And I think that because she had an interest in cancer herself is possibly why she brought through this information from 1960, 1968 and 1966 on the research into cancer, especially from a light perspective, and light certainly being able to help. She talks also about being in a kind of rest home when she got over, and again, you will know from how we have talked about this in the past that certain conditions such as cancer do take a great toll on the spirit body, as well as the physical and mental one, and that people do have have rest homes or go to rest homes to recuperate. You can actually find that also in my book Summerland, and this is what she writes on the 5th of December 1965. I've been able to come to you. Your husband over here has brought me. Yes, I know him well now. I always felt a kinship with him even when I was on Earth. Do you remember? I like him. He has such a great sense of humour. I'm in a kind of rest home now. It is run by the sisters of the community to which I belonged when in incarnation. They are so kind and gentle with me. I'm now lying in a bed high up on a terrace that looks out over a vast sunlit plain. It is a beautiful scene and so restful. I am recuperating from the illness which brought disintegration to my physical body. I feel content and calm and at peace. I shall stay here. Indeed, I have already told Mother Florence that I want to work with her when I am ready. Souls are brought here from Earth and from other places, but I do not know much of these places when they are ready. They are nursed, taken care of here as I am. After I have become adjusted to this life, I think that I shall stay on here and teach with the sisters if they will have me, and if I can be really useful. You see how my Earth psychology will come in useful, together with the explanations of the further stages of progress, when I have learnt more myself. How I shall enjoy correlating the two psychologies in any classes I have and in individual courses. So again, she's talking about learning about the peace that's there, and the fact that they also take on things like teaching and passing that information on to others. One of the things which people who aren't physically or mentally aware of what happens in spirit is the fact that there are towns, cities of all kinds and descriptions. There are universities, there are places of learning. One of those places is called the Great Library, and they would have those certainly on the middle planes. Information, once you have progressed through the higher planes, is certainly assimilated in a different way. Now, you can assimilate knowledge in the same way should you choose to, but until you get quite used to it, you will find the need to physically pick up books to read them. Now, the other way in which that can be assimilated is that you can sense what's in the book and kind of suck up or download that information to the extent where you would feel the emotions of the writer as they wrote the book. And it's a similar thing with music. So there are different ways of taking that information in, but until you get used to it, you would probably feel the need to do as we do here, which is pick a book up and physically read it. I know for those that aren't well acquainted with the afterlife and how it's constructed and how it is lived and how it is experienced, to find that there are places of learning, that there are, as Francis has intimated to Helen Greaves in this book, that there are jobs and work to do. This is also something which is outlined very clearly in my book Summerland. There are similarities between the two books, but essentially it is the same kind or similar kind of information. Again, as I touched on very briefly before, while we were waiting for Melissa, eternal truths don't change. Spirit truth doesn't change. There is always, of course, progress. So whilst the very basics don't ever change, some of those things that need to be fine-tuned and we learn them in a different way and take on a different essence of them. Again, this is something which has been discussed in various programs. There is a spiritual law which states that we can only accept or understand information when we are of a sufficiently raised vibration to take it in. And the simplest way that I can explain that is just like this book, in fact, that we can read it and read it and read it, and take in slightly different aspects of it and certainly the information from it. But once we progress and our vibration is higher, we can read the book and it makes sense to us in a very different way. There are lots of things which we see in it once we've progressed that we didn't before. I suppose it's a bit like a child reading a book at a child's level, and then an intelligent adult reading a book and taking lots of different aspects and information from it. So there's a level at which a child would understand, if you put it that way, and a level which an adult will understand. It's the same when we progress, not only here, but in spirit. So we take in that information as we are able to understand it. Okay. Right. So again, there's lots of information here in this book. I will give the title again. So if you've just joined us, it's called A Testimony of Light, and it's written by Helen Greaves. There are other books by Helen Greaves: The Dissolving Veil, The Wheel of Eternity, and Living Waters. I think this is still published by C.W. Daniel and Company Limited. And as I say, a wonderful book. In so many ways, far ahead of its time. A very popular book, but not one that's become a bestseller. And I think if people can ask for it, so this can be yet again reprinted, it is very well worth reading. To me, it is a classic book, and it's certainly one that carries, for myself, a lot of weight. There is so much truth and information in this book itself that when you think that it was produced in 1969 or first published, it's quite something. So it does vary from a lot of books that are out today, which mediums write, and they tend to write from various aspects. I'm working on my current book at the moment, which is Training for Mediumship. And my own book not only goes into the way we should develop for mediumship and the various aspects of mediumship and how to read, double-checking information that you get to be as accurate as possible. So we can do that. But also it tells you how to find a good medium for readings yourself. My voice is slightly feeling the strain, so we're going to go into a break now, and we'll be straight back after this.
Tune in to the Chris and Wayne Show every Thursday night at 8 o'clock on ParamaniaRadio.com. Up aboard the Haunted Ship of Doom and join Captain Chris.
It was the government secretly outside of the studio.
Skipper Wayne.
I think it's time you get the Kraken out of your butt.
Deck Wench Joe.
Yeah, I got stuck on the corner.
And of course, Cabin Boy Todd.
Oh, look where I'm sitting.
And always remember our motto, don't just listen to the mayhem, be a part of it.
Have you ever wondered what's behind the open door? Then tune in with hosts Maggie Renee and Vicky Johns every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Only on the Paramania Radio Network.
Welcome to the all-new Paramania Radio.
Don't go by the book. Think like a pirate.
Hi, welcome back. You're listening to Leo Bonomo on the Paramania Radio Show. If you want to contact us, the telephone number from the States is 919-295-0150. You can, of course, get us on Skype on Paramania Radio, and there is the chat room. Tonight we're talking about a book called The Testimony of Light by Helen Greaves. It certainly, to me, is a classic because it approaches the subject not only in quite a different way from many books. The source of it itself from Frances Banks, who was a nun, and Helen Greaves, who physically wrote the book, were practicing psychic experiments while they were living in a nunnery. So the actual origins of the book from that sense is very unusual, and the fact that Helen Greaves had the courage to write this book and get it published. And writing and publishing are two different things. You know, writing something is certainly one thing, but to manage to get it published is something else. And so not just the source of the book from the point of view of the people involved, but the source of book from spirit as well makes it a very remarkable book. I was just looking through in the interlude, and this book was first published in 1969. I do have quite an old copy. I think this copy is from 1988. But as a show of some of the success that this book has had, it was reprinted in 77, 1980, 85, 1986, and twice in 1988. We have published on the chat room the Amazon link for the book, so it's reprinted again. It does appear to have undergone several different cover changes as well, and no pun intended, but it is a testimony to the information and the writing and the content of this book, how popular this book is. Now, I say popular, and I mean it specifically in the sense, in the case of this book, of it is in constant demand, but has never become a bestseller, and that, I think, is a great shame. I know from my own experience of spirit that the information in this book is correct. It is quite remarkable, and if you do want to listen, if you've just joined us, if you do want to listen back, you'll see that there is some talks about some medical experiments that were being done by doctors at that time on cancer, and the fact that they were using light to highlight the bad cells, etc., which, as I said, if we go back a couple of days, they've now found a new way of treating prostate cancer. And what they're doing with that, essentially, they've got bacteria which they found at the very bottom of the sea, and they give you a pill or inject it in some way so that it goes around the body, and then they insert a probe. If you imagine one of those lamps from years ago that had a glass stem, and they just put a light at the end of it so the light goes through the probe. It's something similar. And this was on the news a couple of days ago, as I say. And they insert this into the prostate and they light this up, and it activates the bacteria in some ways. So perhaps they wake up and they start to attack the cancer in the prostate. They have great hopes for that in other types and forms of cancer cure. But as we do know, unfortunately, in this materialistic world, we do have the greed for money over everything else. And you can find on the web various cures for cancer that are being chased down, if that's the right phrase, by the big pharmaceuticals, because given all kinds of excuses as this may not be safe, that may not be safe, but essentially not wanting to ruin their own money-making propensities. So there you go. So even in this book, written in 1969, it talks about advancements of cancer and light being used to discover, and to an extent, in 69, light being used as a form of treatment for it. I've just gone back to these pages. Now, I will read it out again because I do think it's worth reading. And this is in the Daily Telegraph, 31st of October 1968, cancer cells detected by laser light. And it just says at this time, a promising new way of detecting cancer cells using laser light to illuminate them under a microscope is being investigated. And it says there is evidence that the malignant cells take on a brilliant red glow. Now, this may be something connected to this current new discovery. It does make me wonder how new these discoveries are, but this new discovery of being able to insert a light in some way to activate this bacteria. Lots of very, very good information here. It is something of amazement to me that with the information in this book, whilst it is popular, it has not become a bestseller. There's a great deal of information here about life, some of the regions, and again, as I say, there is a slightly kind of religious context to this because of them both being nuns, but she makes this comment here: I visited the lower regions, excuse me, though I assure you with conductors who were able to guide and protect us. Believe me, it's a terrible regions of semi-gloom, of unwholesome, sticky emotions, of utter distortion of all that is beautiful. One's feelings are wrung by the pitiful sights. Compassion flows out for those poor half-alive creatures in their self-darkness. There are wonderful helpers in these regions. So there is a slight taint to this of the religious connotation of hell and damnation. But it isn't actually a heavy thing. It is, from my own experiences, fairly accurate in the way that it is described, although it is a description of its time. And if you want to read other works, there is Allan Kardec, there is Swedenborg, and his wonderful Swedenborg wrote many books. Some are literally just pamphlets, and there is one there on hell. And again, Swedenborg was alive during the 1500s. Again, language of the day and understanding and knowledge of the day, even though there was a reality from spirit being given there. So if you want to have some books which I could recommend, then I could certainly give you a list of those, and I'm just going to work quickly on the list of those. Okay, now, if you do want a reading, either tonight, you can contact us on the USA number, and that number is 919-2950-150. You can get us through Paramania Radio, or there is the chat room. So if you want to do that, that's fantastic. I do apologise. I've got a bit of a sticky throat tonight, so as you may have heard. So there is that. Now, if you want to contact us on the show, we can do that, or you can go to Leo Bonomo. So it's leo-bonomo.com, and you can find me on there, and you can book face-to-face readings if you do live fairly close, or Skype readings, etc. Okay, now I'm just trying to look through some of the links here, because I have got books which are recommended, I do feel. Right, let me just... I shall find them for after the break, but there's some excellent books. I could certainly recommend Swedenborg. Kardec is quite heavy as well. Again, written in the language of the time. There are two very, very well-known books by Kardec. One's called the Medium's Book, and the other is called the Spirits Book. And one of the interesting things about the Spirits Book is that it describes spirits as of being of this kind or of that kind, and essentially it is very descriptive of people in general. We tend to think of spirits, and when we talk about spirits, of saying, well, you know, this spirit in spirit is like this or like that. But the way that Kardec describes the spirits, it is actually very recognizable as a description of a particular type of person that we would encounter. So whether that's intentional or not, whilst he describes them as spirits being of this type of nature or that type of nature and having this influence and these inclinations, it is very, very clearly seen to be of this type of person or that type of person. And what essentially that underlines is something that we all know, that when we pass into spirit, initially, certainly, unless we are more spiritually progressed, there is little change. We are exactly the same one moment as we are afterwards, depending upon our mental development, our experiences, whether we are a believer in spirit, etc., or whatever, or whether we might have, for example, if we were murdered or had some accident, whether we were willing to relinquish this physical life for the next life and places, etc. And those that can't will sometimes become earthbound or earth-locked and not be able to make that transition. For them, it's very much a question of it being very dreamlike and a dream they can't wake up from. So if you can imagine that, that can have a small sense of dread there for some people, or of realising that they are locked into a dream they can't wake from. I had a very, very similar dream like that myself many years ago, and was given to me as not an explanation but an experience of what can happen. So we can become earthbound if we don't want to give up, or we have thoughts of revenge, etc. But in the Kardec's book, Spirit's Book, it does give explanation of this kind of spirit and that kind of spirit, which we would recognise as people. Now, the reason that I'm kind of labouring that point a little is because there are certain institutes within the world that teach spiritualism, and certain mediums that have a slightly distorted point of view, in my view, of the fact that when we pass over, everything is light and fluffy, etc., and evil doesn't exist. And some organisations have actually made that statement, which is quite deceptive. Essentially, because we're the same the moment we pass over, if we have those inclinations, for example, we're a murderer or have other inclinations, we do remain the same. And that is whether there is a real positive part to our personality or a negative. And how some institutions can just say that evil in spirit doesn't exist at all is quite beyond me. People are people, whether they're here with a physical body or not, and that is something that we have to understand. Alan Kardec's book's very interesting from that point of view. There is something of that in this book that we're currently talking about with Testimony of Light, where Francis Banks visits with helpers some of the lower planes. Now, there are several books which also talk about these experiences of the lower planes and finding what the conditions are like there. Now, it is no coincidence, of course, and as people who know me know, I don't accept those coincidences. There is always a plan behind them. But if you do, excuse me, if you do start to read, for example, this book, Kardec's book, and other books, I think The Edge of the Etheric is another one. If you do start to read some of those books, there are explanations of places of darkness and this terrible thing happening or that terrible thing happening. Now, if you consider that, for example, the Catholic faith has this view of hell and damnation, etc., and they talk about it in those terms, you can see actually that from the spiritual books, which have certainly a more insightful view and illumination of those places, you can see where the Catholic Church has got these ideas of hellfire and damnation. We don't necessarily find ourselves there. We are not condemned to those. There is open progress to every human soul, and incidentally I would apply that to animals. Animals progress as well, slightly different way to us, but we have a path before us. So some of the things in the Bible about hell and damnation and an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, these have fundamentally been changed to represent revenge for revenge itself. In spirit, of course, we need to atone for all those things which we have done or created, and that is not only positive but also the negative things as well. So there is some assertion from spirit that whilst we can do whatever we feel we need to from here, here being Earth, of course, that we are here to experience various things, but whilst we do what we do to have those experiences, it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't relinquish them in one form or another over there. I remember reading an account many years ago in a book. I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure at this moment in time which book it was, because I do read an awful lot and have quite a few books in my own private library. And this gentleman was a thief, and he stole basically to keep alive, so there was an evil intent behind it. But he was very much surprised that because he hadn't lived what he would call a pure life, that he found himself where he was, which essentially Summerland, or heaven, whatever name you wish to give it. And he couldn't quite believe that because he stole and did various other things, that he would be entitled to live in the Summerland or heaven. So naturally it was a good surprise for him, but there was a lot of confusion there as to where he found himself because he didn't consider himself pure. So this notion of hell, hellfire and damnation, which we have, for example, from the Catholic Church, is really a description of some of those places that people that are quite evil found themselves in, and it was used as a stick to beat us, and still is to an extent, of you need to do what we, as in the church or any particular religion, what we tell you, because otherwise the consequences are. And as said at the start of the show, these religions really do put the fear of God into you. And God is, it's not a person, obviously, but it is an energy. It is an energy that is very aware of itself and aware of everything else in existence. And therefore it doesn't judge, there is only reaction there. And once we begin to understand that this all-intelligent ether, as Arthur Finley used to put it, is there, and that it is reactive and constantly learning, constantly experiencing. And part of our job as a soul in incarnating is to have the experience, as it were, individually with us, but also to express and pass on that information, just like an electric current, into the God force. So there is a direct connection between what we do and what we experience and what we cause, and that being fed into, if you like. I suppose the simile there would be a huge computer that is constantly learning. And if we're just talking about ourselves and 7.5 billion people on this planet that share these experiences with us from fractals of time, there's this constant input, and so there is a huge learning by the creative source, whatever name you want to give to it. I'm just going to take a quick drink because my throat is playing up. Okay. So we get our idea of hell from religions. I would say, in one sense, it's certainly exaggerated from the point of view that everyone that doesn't toe the line, according to according to religions, will all end up in the same place. It really isn't that clear cut, and it certainly isn't that simple. Okay, so I'm just going to find another passage from this book, and there are a series of scripts which would have been translated to Helen Greaves, and okay, so let me just see if I can find a suitable place to start, because as I'm trying to read, it is taking me further up. Okay, so it says here, in the manner of this new dimension to which I'm becoming accustomed, I understood in silence all that he was communicating to me, he being God, of course. It was as if my journeys were unrolled before me on a screen of colour and movement, yet without sound. I was entranced and at times joyful, sad, proud and ashamed, yet he never uttered a word of shame. Now, the interesting thing about that is that this is part of the life recall that we go through, flashbacks, if you want to say that, and there is, of course, that common term of our life flashing before our eyes if we have a very close call. When we pass over, there are reviews, sometimes several, and with more depth. We are going to be coming back to that particular passage straight after this, so I welcome you back.
What do you think about this?
What the hell is this?
Dude, this is not the boring psychic.
Oh, okay. How about this instead?
Take out the papers and the trash. This isn't it. Or you don't get no spending cash.
No. This is what I'm talking about.
Yeah! The party is live every Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, with a twist of metal. Melissa Bruce is the heavy metal psychic.
Only on Paramania Radio. Be there.
Do you want talk radio that is hip, exciting, and has amazing guests?
And it's all about the paranormal. Join Sheena Meadow each week on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. You'll want to come play with us at the Haunted Playground.
Welcome to the all-new Paramania Radio.
Don't go by the book. Think like a pirate.
Hi, welcome back. You're listening to Leo Bonomo on the Paramania Radio Show. If you do want to call in for next week or now, if you can get a time, it's 919-295-0150. You can get us on Paramania Radio and on the chat line. You can also contact me on www.leo-bonomo.com. If you're looking for a late Christmas present, you can find my book Summerland, Summerland, exactly as it sounds, Summerland, and you can find that on Amazon. Talks about the afterlife, what it's like to die, one of the reasons for cot deaths. It talks about reincarnation, mediumship from the other side, existence of the planes and what some of the planes are like, and I'm sure you'll find it very, very interesting. If you like poetry as well, there's a book of thoughts which you can find on Kindle. You can find Summerland on Kindle as well as a paperback. Book of Thoughts is just Kindle, and it's a book of poems, thoughts and observations from spirit, so you might find that rather interesting. And there's a new book as and when I can get it finished, and it's called Training for Mediumship, and it's about the development of mediumship, but it's also for those people that go to mediums and need to find out what a good medium actually should be like, and standards, etc. So it is slightly different to many other mediumship books written by mediums, which tend to concentrate just on development. While we're talking about books, I'm talking about a book called The Testimony of Light by Helen Greaves. To me, certainly in a particular sector, this is one of the best books ever written on spirit. Remarkable for different things, but certainly one of the things was that Frances Banks, who came back from spirit to talk to her friend Helen Greaves, they were both nuns, so a slightly unusual start from the book, and certainly very very informative in lots of different ways. I was just reading a small bit from beyond, from the other side of the break there, and essentially what she's talking about is a past life review, and I just start a little way back, and I hope you enjoy this. It was as if my journeys were unrolled before me on a screen of colour and movement, yet without sound. I was entranced and at times joyful, sad, proud and ashamed. Yet he, this being the God Force, never uttered a word of blame. He smiled with infinite understanding as once again, only this time on a vaster and more detailed scale. The blueprint showed with definite markings the little triumphs as well as the failures of my endeavours. I am or was I always shall be, I recall thinking. As if in answer I saw him in flashes as he was when I had contacted him in my various states of being, for he had played a part in many experiences and always as a brother, the mentor, the inspirer. And I knew him not, I thought with sadness, I remembered him not. So there is a slightly religious connotation to this, as you would expect. But essentially what Francis was describing there was this past life review. And it is something that we all go through. It is something very much to be welcomed. Again, there are parts where, of course, we fail. We are only human. But it's a point of not being afraid of those failures, of not wanting to see them as completely negative. Now, sometimes people are a bit wary when I say something like that. One of the reasons is that I found that whatever we may actually deem to be negative in this life, eventually in reflection, we do find out it's a positive. And one of the best ways to explain that is that, we can have, for example, an accident or a disease, and it creates certain conditions in our lives. And with the benefit of hindsight, perhaps just from spirit or certainly later in life, we realise that if these particular things didn't happen, we wouldn't be on the path that we're on and wouldn't have learnt new things. Various conditions and states of being do teach us an awful lot, and not only do they teach us about how we ourselves personally deal with them, but it certainly gives us an insight into how others feel and how they are dealing with them too. So if we look at it from a purely human point of view, yes, there are effects which can be quite devastating and make for very hard lives, one way or another, especially if something is taken away from us, whether that might be a limb or whatever. However, from a spiritual point of view, we understand that we are learning from that experience, and that in itself is quite valuable. It's something that I've noticed in my life whenever anything's happened, and I certainly have had more than a few experiences which I know personal friends of mine have said have been extremely difficult. And I explained to them, as I explained to you now, that I wouldn't change a thing, however difficult, however sad, however negative some of those experiences have been. I look back on them now and I do thank the Creator, God, Spirit, whatever you want to call it, for those experiences, because they've taught me an awful lot. This is something that is discussed in excuse me, my forthcoming book, and it's been discussed live on air as well with various people that have called up for readings, and that is that all these experiences help to make me a better medium. I certainly hope, anyway. Unless we've actually experienced something and been there and have a way of either expressing it ourselves or spirit, the communicator, coming forward and finding a way to express that to the person that you're reading for, it's something that's quite unique, and is one of the reasons that lots of mediums have hard lives. Not all of us, of course, but certainly those experiences help us to understand others. Those experiences that we have, whether they are negative or positive, certainly helped to give us compassion, and compassion is a wonderful, wonderful thing. It is changing the world as we look now, and a very simple example of that would be many years ago, in the First World War, Second World War, etc. The enemy was depicted as evil, and all kinds of propaganda went out. Now we have the benefit, really, of seeing that there are many innocents in war, and that generally the people that get hurt most are not just the soldiers, some who have been conscripted, and of course some who volunteer, but what I would call the bystanders, the rest of the population. War annihilates the innocent. Of course, there are the guilty involved, but generally those that make war, and it takes very few to make a war, unfortunately. Sometimes war starts from very, very small beginnings, almost insignificant arguments, and the disparities that come from that. And they get inflamed, and before you know it, many thousands, millions do get involved. And it was the same, I think, I'm correct in saying, although I'm getting a tick from this through spirit, it was Archduke Ferdinand that was assassinated before the start of the Second World War, and we went from that one assassination essentially to, I think the figures are around 60 million killed in the Second World War. So we had one incident that became inflamed, and all kinds of excuses made for it, land grabs, etc. In fact, nothing actually too different from what we're experiencing today. So, excuse me. So, we can have something very small. It doesn't take many people to start a war, but often millions and millions are affected by it. So, okay. If you would like to read this book, you can find it on Amazon. I think it's still published by the same company, the C.W. Daniel Company, and you can find that on Amazon. It's called The Testimony of Light by Helen Greaves. Again, a wonderful book in so many ways, not just because of its physical source, but its spiritual source. Okay, if you have books that you feel we should be reading, do let us know. Come in on the chat line next week now, because we are, as always, quickly running out of time. Send us your thoughts on any books that you have written, why you particularly like it, and even if you feel that there's a book that you are not entirely happy with and the reasons for that. We can always discuss anything of a spiritual nature, paranormal nature. I'm just going to read a couple of things from the back cover, just as in going towards an end with this. So it says, a glass of spiritual champagne, and that's by the Church's Fellowship News. Again, this book was written in 1969, so these aren't new quotes. Never have we read such a spontaneous, simple, direct and happy, instructive set of scripts from the other side. Excuse me, and that's from the Science of Thought review. Telepathy between the living is now generally accepted, but telepathy between the living and the so-called dead is both more doubtful and less common. The highest levels of communication is undoubtedly that by telepathy, and this remarkable book is an outstanding example of communication between the minds of two close friends on either side of the veil. Those who have known Helen Greaves and the late Francis Banks and their respective writings are impressed by the authenticity of these scripts. Their phrasing and contents are typical of Miss Banks, as they are completely unlike the style of writing shown by the author in her previous books and articles. Francis Banks' message that the death of the body is but a gentle pass into a much freer and fuller life presents itself with great clarity and conviction. And this is the actual 13th impression. So if you want to look at that, it's through Amazon. Again, it is a wonderful book. It seems to be constantly bought, but never been a bestseller. And for me, it's certainly one of the great spiritual books that I have read. It is a continuous favourite with myself. It is one that personally and publicly I do. Not quite sure what happened there. I may have gone off air for a slight while. I think I touched a button. Anyway, it is a book that I have impressed people with for many, many years. And I think I first found this book in 1980 or shortly afterwards. Okay. Right. So if you do have thoughts on books, or you want to talk about anything that's spiritual, then do let us know. Do be in contact. Once again, the number is 919-2950-150. So if you're in the States, you can call us on that number. And you can also get us on Paramania Radio, and that's the Skype address. And you can get us on Chatline. You can, of course, contact me on www.leo-bonomo, B-O-N-O-M for mother, .com. So you can get me through that. You can also get me on Facebook. You can also get me through the Living with Light community on Facebook as well. So if you live in the area and you're wanting to be involved, do contact us in either of those ways, and certainly do give you your support to the Living with Light community. There's some wonderful things going on, and if you do live around the Bedford area or want to join my own circle, we are open for that. My partner also on there, Lorraine, she's a Reiki healer, so if you need that kind of healing, or just make your views known, do contact us there and on my site, that site, Facebook, and of course you can make comments here. So once again, try and have a look at this wonderful book. It is certainly a classic. It's I'm not quite sure why it's never made bestseller. It certainly should be, but we'll speak again next week when we shall line up the show, and have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas, and we'll see you before the new year. In fact, I've just realised looking up that we have a couple of minutes left. So do write to us about any books that you have. If you're interested in various courses, or you want a certain topic of discussion, do let us know. Do make your feelings known as to what books you may have enjoyed, if there are any spiritual films that you feel you might have enjoyed and that others want to. And there is quite a wonderful book called The Astral City, and that's also a film, and one of the it is obviously about life after death and the city and various aspects of it. One of the most unusual things about that particular book is that it was made into a film, and the film is word for word the book. Very unusual, very interesting film. So if you want to discuss that, there is A Matter of Life and Death with David Niven, which also is a wonderful, wonderful film. Part of it in black and white. But okay. Yeah, so there are various films if you want to discuss them. Ghost, of course, is another wonderful film. There's a Robin Williams film called What Dreams May Come. There are many films which have been very popular, which are connected to this subject. Another wonderful film is The Lovely Bones, about a young murdered girl. I won't spoil the plot for you, but there is certainly that. So if you have films you want to discuss, books you want to discuss, or any of the vast range of topics that come under the supernatural, do call, write in, or Skype us. Okay, we're going to leave you with that. As you can probably hear, my throat is playing up a little bit this week, so I'll leave you with that. God bless you, and thank you very much. Have a wonderful Christmas, and we'll see you the other side.